The majority of our life is lived in liminal space.
And there's this in-between space, this liminal space.
This liminality that reveals possibility.
I think we're in a liminal moment, but also in a place of transformation.
I have great affection for the church and a troubled relationship with it.
Just to be alive in time means that we're on the threshold of the future.
That can't be the gospel, because God said to love our neighbors.
We don't know what the future looks like. We have to work it out together.
Hey, Michael Gunger, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. It's pretty cool to have you on my screen today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Where are you coming from? Are you in the mountains of Colorado?
I'm in the mountains of California.
California?
Yeah,
okay.
Nevada City, which is sort of by Tahoe and Sacramento and stuff like that.
So that's the other side of the mountains of Colorado.
I guess they probably are. You could probably trace mountains all the way from Colorado somewhere, right?
Yeah, somewhere.
There might be some deserts to cross. I don't know.
There might be. Yeah. Well, it's cool. I sent you an email. I see that you're putting out some new stuff. You got some new creative juices flowing, and I was like, I really want to talk about that. So I wanted to jump into some of that today.
Great.
Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. Well, I like to open up with a fun question. And here's the one I thought of especially for you. It's handcrafted for Michael Gunger. If you could sit down with any musician from any point in history and learn a skill or a technique, who would it be and what would they teach you?
I'd sit down with Bach, and I would, I don't know what I would just love to watch. I just would love to watch up close and see what questions might arise in the moment. But
that's cool.
Just to watch the absolute genius at work, would be amazing.
Yeah. What is it about Bach that would that's your go-to guy? What captures your attention about him?
His music wasn't, it's hard it's interesting to even call it his music because it feels so quintessential to how the universe is, or how order and chaos dance together, how dissonance and harmony dance together, how it's just so exquisitely put together that it's like math itself or something. So to me, that he has had to be a vessel in a way that is a vessel of God, of the universe, of reality itself in such a pure way, musically in a way, to let that come through him. Because that's not the product of an ego. It's not the product of a guy trying to be special. That's he's letting music itself come through him. So to watch that, and it's just, there's not a lot of composers to me that I see it so consistently, or I feel that so consistently come through. It just feels like pure music in a way. I don't know how else to say it.
That's interesting. That's almost like that creativity comes from outside of us and yet also inside of us at the same time, like a muse that happens. If you ever have that, oh my gosh, I have to sit down and write something right now, because if I don't, I'm going to miss it. The moment will be gone, kind of a thing.
Yeah, it will.
And you can't capture it again.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that is external, or do you think it is internal, or do you think it's a dance between the two?
I don't think there's the way I see what we are, those delineations of internal and external are only our own mental constructs of ourselves. I think the inside goes with the outside in a way that you can't actually put any clean lines between them. It's just an experience of an inside or an outside, but it's just the same reality. And so I would say, when I'm saying it's not coming from the ego, it's not that I'm saying it's not coming from inside. I'm saying it's not coming from the ideas that I have of who I am, and that thinking mind that it's going to immediately start judging, that's going to immediately start trying to create this from some sort of place of lack, which is what the ego is a sense of lack. It's a sense of resistance to what is, as opposed to just a flow with what is. So it's, when I say it's just coming from how things are, it's in the same, I like the word the Tao, which is translated to Christian words or Bible words would be like the way, or the word as well, where sort of this living spirit, this living expression of God that we are already fundamentally. So we are the creativity of God. We are the flow of the word being spoken into reality. And so when we're not resisting that, when we're not trying to stand on our own 2 feet as the feet of the ground of reality, we are still being expressed. And to me, so that's what I hear when I hear Bach's music being expressed. I hear spirit expressing itself as Bach and as what's coming through Bach. And that includes Bach's internal. It's not that Bach has to be musically inclined enough and musically experienced enough that he gets out of the way in a way, or like what he thinks of as him, his body, his mind, is so skillful of an instrument in the flow that it sort of can just move unimpeded by thought, by judgment. But he's not getting stuck on, is this a good chord to go to? There's not time when you're in that sort of flow. It's just the flow itself.
Oh, that's really interesting. Do you see like individuality being a part of, like, if you were to go to like a Carl Jung's individuation kind of a concept, do you think that is a part of the process at all? Or do you think that is just a fancier ego dressed up as something? How does individuality in a pure sense fit into this experience you're talking about?
I'm not super versed in Jung enough to be able to like critique that specific idea. I think when you speak of individuality and individuation, what I would imagine he's talking about, which is not informed, but is specifics of, so when we talk about like, I am not, who am I? There's this body and this mind that most of us identify with. And it's actually not even just so clean as that. Usually when we get down to a normal person's experience in any given moment, it's not even just that they're identified with the body or mind. It's usually a very specific aspect of that body or mind. So I'm sad right now, or I'm a musician and I'm on there's one job or one role or one emotion or one storyline, one trauma that I've done some sessions with people where I try to like, where do you find you? Like, what do you think you are? And I've had people like point out a painful place in their body. Like, I'm right here in this rib. And when I dig into that, it's like, what's going on there? Like, well, there's some pain there. I have broken that once. And it's where we find the constriction, usually, that we go there. So I don't think individuation is the same as constriction, or being an individual, being the specific expression of the Tao, if you will, expression of God, that this body or this mind or any of its facets are in this moment. I think that's kind of in the high way of speaking of individuality. It's not that we're just a blank, automaton, or that it's a factory. Here's the one that's printing out bodies and minds, and it's all the same. It's far more sacred and specific than that. Like every atom, every molecule, every arrangement of those, every body from moment to moment is completely unique and completely new. And that's when you are set free to be the whatever full individuation of that expression in this moment. So Bach wrote like Bach. There's that individuation. It's not that everybody who becomes a pure vessel or whatever of music writes what Bach did. It still was specifically Bach. But it was Bach unimpeded by Bach, if you will. in my ears. That's how I hear it. At least when he's in, and I kind of doubt that he was like that all the time. Well, he would be a great master. He'd be another Jesus Christ. But when he was making music, for some reason, there was something about. I just don't think that music could come from a place that wasn't complete surrender to that music.
I like that. You did capture kind of the individuation concept, is like becoming like who you are without the fears and the egos and all that attachments of questioning and limitations, kind of a thing. I have like this Zen meditation practice that I've been doing for like a decade now. And I've noticed you can do some weird things with consciousness itself. And like, you think consciousness is like trapped inside of like behind your eyes or something. And then you go into like meditative states and you're like, actually, it's not. It's like, it's almost like a sphere that is like inside and outside kind of a thing. I don't know how it works, but it feels weird when you're like doing consciousness tricks, and then all of a sudden like the way that you see the world kind of like it can fall apart in that moment because we're so used to being trapped behind our eyes. Like, I am this brain, and the body just kind of is like a little mech suit that like carries me around, but I am my brain. I am how I think. And how do you think ego would like play into this idea of consciousness? Is like, we do need to be defined, like this is me, free from fears and all of that. But then as soon as you start defining things, you can almost fence yourself in too much and limit the creativity. So how would you balance like being who you are with also that over definition of ego that might get in the way of creativity?
Mm-hmm. Well, the ego would say, I am this or I am that. So I am this brain. Or even I am this consciousness. Could be a way. The ego is so clever
It's sneaky
at finding ways of stepping in and being the experiencer, the driver of experience, the doer, the knower. And yeah, you're right. When you start really looking at consciousness, it stops. It will never fit your ego's clean definition of what it is. The ego would like to say consciousness is something that I have. Me consciousness or me, Michael, the body or the brain, the mind. I have consciousness. It's something that exists in here. And that, when you start examining it, turns out not to be how it works. And it can be directly observed through meditation. Mm-hmm. And because we can even say, what do you think you are? If I think I'm the brain, and then I go, so I'm the brain and I am conscious of the brain. How can the brain is within the consciousness? The brain that I'm thinking that I am is within consciousness. The body that I think I am is actually within consciousness. In the same way, a good example might be that picture hanging behind you. Is that Mary?
Yeah.
It would be easy for me right now to think of that as being outside of this screen, right? Like that's a picture, because I can imagine that you're in a room and that's hanging on the wall behind you. But when I'm actually looking at that picture of Mary, I'm still just looking at this screen on my computer. So that picture is actually on my screen. What I'm experiencing is on that screen. And in the same way, kind of what we experience as a body, as a brain, as the universe, is all in consciousness. You can't find anything that's not in consciousness. Otherwise, you wouldn't be conscious of it. So there's to think of inside and outside the body, we must recognize as a thought within consciousness. There's no accessing anything but consciousness.
Yeah.
And the mystics and the sages through history have talked that consciousness is God. That it's not a product of it's not a product of my mind. It's not a product of my brain even. My brain is a product of consciousness. So the mystics and the sages reverse that. And it's there's interesting, because the problem of consciousness is not something that science has solved, but there's a lot of, with quantum mechanics and the ways that our understandings of the universe have become so counterintuitive to what we thought they were, with Newton and classical physics and stuff, there's been more theoretical scientists that are like looking at the problem of consciousness, if you will, from new lenses and finding some interesting things. Like maybe we might be thinking of this completely wrong, that this is not just a product of the brain, because that's how kind of our modern cut it all apart and try to understand the universe as a bunch of separate pieces. That model turns out to not be how things are.
Yeah.
And so we're like, our model of consciousness happens to still be aligned with the model of the universe that we know is not true. So what are some other ways that we could think of consciousness? And my guess is science is eventually going to catch up with the sages and the mystics. Whoa, okay, this is just consciousness. Everything is consciousness. And what we think of as my brain, what we think of as my body, are expressions of that consciousness.
Mm. Yeah, there's a fun trick that I was listening to like Rob Bell interview his son on his podcast like years ago, and they did this weird thing where they're like, I want you to do this math problem. And so in my head, I'm doing this math problem. And then they threw a question right after that. And they're like, what part of you just watched you do the math problem?
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa,
Mm-hmm.
there's an observer. There's something outside that looks down upon how my brain is working. That's when I really like there's something that you just kind of experience, but then you get some words to add to it. And you're like, I just saw that happen.
Mm-hmm.
That was just weird. But yeah, that is interesting. How would you define the sacred in, like, going along with our conversation here? And we got quantum physics, we got consciousness, we got ego, individuation, psychology, all this stuff. Like, how would you go about defining something that is sacred? And not necessarily opposed to something that is secular so much, but how do you look at that now these days, the word sacred?
What first came up for when you said that was that old story of take off your shoes, this is holy ground, from the Bible. That story of like noticing, oh wow, this is holy ground. I don't think the ground before he took his shoes off was not holy ground. He finally recognized it. So what is, and that to me is sort of what I like about the scriptures, the Hebrew Bible and the Christian scriptures, and kind of how it unfolds and where it moves, is it does seem to start with a more rudimentary, God in the early Old Testament is really kind of a bad dude. He's kind of a bastard, he's killing everybody all the time and having everybody else kill everybody all the time. And,
yeah, he's like the mob boss.
Yeah, and really jealous and kind of like, I don't want you like in other gods. He's like really insecure about himself. But the more, and then it becomes a little more like, okay, we're gonna. They find him first in like the Holy of Holies, and they have a tent and they build it around him, and there's God. And that eventually starts seeming like to expand. And eventually through the New Testament, you start seeing you see God is all in all. And it sort of expands in that way. And I like that journey because it's like we have to start with something. We start by seeing something as sacred. To just say everything is sacred to someone who hasn't, to the ego, if you will, to somebody who's just completely lost in their ego, to say everything is sacred is basically the same as saying nothing is sacred. You might as well just just eliminate the word.
Yeah.
So you got to find something that's sacred. And sometimes for people, that's like when we go to church and we take the communion, that's sacred. And then if you can find the sacredness of that act, and it's almost what it is, like what is it when it's sacred? I think it's that feeling that made Moses go, this is holy ground, I got to take my shoes off, because there's something about this moment that is so complete, that is so perfect, that is so beautiful, that and transcendent of what I thought reality was, who I thought I was, you get caught into going back to what we talked about, like the flow. or the individuation of who I thought I was, what this moment is in its very specifics, this bread, this wine, these taste buds, this imagination, this heartbeat, all of it gets caught up into this magical moment of sacred. It's like, wow, it's like, oh, there's no words to it. When you experience the sacred, you can kind of only call it sacred in the rearview mirror. Because when you're actually in it, you're not calling it anything. You're just present to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there are rituals and things that, why I like religion when it's used well, is I think these are great tools to help to teach us the sacred, to lead us into the sacred. And it's not that wine and bread then becomes sacred actually objectively in itself. It already was, if you could see it. Mm-hmm. But if you can't, it's like with those with ears to hear, like Jesus used to say, like it, for the people that couldn't hear what his parables were, what his teachings were, they weren't sacred. They were just stories about lost coins and sheep and weird stuff. Like, what is this guy talking about? But if you could hear it, they were sacred. And that's how everything is. The more that, so those pointers, those practices, when you come back week after week to the Eucharist and you take the body and the blood, eventually the moments between those moments, you can start finding the body and the blood.
Yeah.
And they're like practice. They're like training wheels.
I like that. I've never thought of it that way. I got a picture in my head of like an hourglass. You know, when you're on the top and you just say everything is sacred, then nothing is sacred because you haven't learned to see the sacred. But you bring it down to that one thing. Like, we're going to find the sacred in this, communion moment or this song or this experience. And then that teaches you how to see the sacredness in everything. And then you can widen that back out.
Yeah. Because then when you widen it back out, it's not that you're widening it back out from a place of flattening it again. It's not that the one sacred thing becomes less sacred as you start to see it elsewhere. It's every bit as sacred as when that was the only sacred thing in the universe.
Yeah.
Because then when you go out and you look at that tree and you feel a sacredness, it's not, yeah, that's sacred too, like the communion. You're not even thinking about the bread and the wine now. The tree is the bread and the wine. Whatever is the specific moment. Each of those sand, they're still singular. The individuation of it, every single moment that you experience, is completely specific. It's maybe you never get out of once you're down into the narrow part of the hourglass where it's just the one grain of sand. It's not, let's get out of that now and get back. It's like this happens, but you don't leave the specifics of any of those grains of sand. Every single moment that you encounter is as specific and individuated and special, if you will, as when I only believe that you could find the sacred in church or whatever,
So it's like religion is teaching us to see the sacred, define what it means to be sacred so that we can then spot it in the present moment, wherever we find ourselves, whether that's at the table or, or with a loved one or going on a hike or making music.
Yeah, the problem is it's undefinable because as soon as it's truly experienced in itself, again, in the rearview mirror, it's sacred. It's like, wow, that was a sacred meal that we had together. Not because while we were having that meal together, we were all going, isn't this as soon as, like, if we go, isn't this a sacred meal? It kind of takes us out of it. In a way, just for a moment, then we're kind of standing back from it going like, oh yeah, this is a nice time. We're having a good time. But if you're actually in a conversation with someone or chewing a piece of food in your mouth in the moment in fullness, with not doing anything else, just it's the food chewing itself in a way. It's just the fullness of that moment. It is sacred is just a good description of it. It's so, it's not that we need to do something to get the food to be sacred or do something to get our experience of it to be sacred. If we just notice our actual experience, even sadness can be sacred. Grief can be sacred. Lament can be sacred. If you go, wow, can you feel the heartbreak of this moment? But really feel it and really feel the life of it, not as an abstract concept, not as something I understand, but as a complete surrender to life by really allowing it to be as full as it wants to be. It's sacred. It's absolutely beautiful. Pure sadness, pure anger, pure anything, like when it's just itself, is sacred. But not in an abstract philosophical or theological way where it's like, do you see that your grief is sacred? Then that gets a little weird because now I'm abstracting your grief and asking you to abstract it. And then it's not an experience of sacredness. I'm just trying to change. If I'm saying something like that, it's actually more likely that I'm probably saying it from a place of resisting your grief. If I'm, people that use spirituality, this sort of spirituality that I'm talking about, as a bypass, they use it to like, oh, I'm feeling sad. How can I not feel sad? I'll tell myself that this is sacred, or I'll tell myself, and then you're not going to find the sacredness of it. Just by really letting it be is where you'll find the experience of what we would call the sacred.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like as soon as you start labeling it, you've left it behind.
Yeah. Well, you're in your mind.
Yeah, in your mind, because you then step outside of it to observe it, and then you've kind of lost the moment of it itself in order to observe it.
In a way, but it's because you've lost, now you're in the moment of observing it and you've forgotten that you're doing that. So the actual moment that you're in, you're not present to because you forgot, you're not noticing that you are labeling it. It's not that labeling it is bad. And it's not even that labeling it actually pushes anything away. It's just now I'm labeling reality and I'm not even aware that I'm labeling reality. So now the food that I'm eating is labeling reality. Mm-hmm. But I'm not aware. I've become unconscious because I've become identified as a me who's thinking about reality and that can understand reality, that can label reality in a true way, as though that's actually what it is. And so now I've moved away from my actual self, my actual individuated, embodied, this moment self, into an abstract version of myself that is standing apart from it. Because I'm not actually standing apart from it. I can't. I'm thinking that I am, and I'm identified with that which I think I am, the person who can stand apart from it. So in a way, it's like, you can have a thought of having a horse. And I can imagine that I have a horse. I don't have a horse in this reality, in this embodied reality, this individuated reality, but I can imagine that I do. And that's a beautiful gift to be able to imagine. And imagination can actually turn into action in a way that maybe I could get a horse someday if I really kept imagining it. So it's beautiful. It's a beautiful tool. But if I conflate or combine those two realities of the imagined horse and the world that I don't have a horse, and I actually believe that I have the horse, to the place where I feel like I need to feed it and I feel shame that I'm not being a better owner to that some and I haven't been feeding it lately. Now we're starting to get into psychosis. Now we're starting to get into I'm not living in reality anymore. I'm living in some sort of fantasy that's going to start causing more and more suffering. And that's a sort of exaggerated way of what we're doing all the time in our egos. We're going, I have this imagined self that I should be a certain way, and things should be a certain way. I should be experiencing my meals as sacred, and I'm not. Oh, what do I need to do? And now I'm just lost in this. I should be feeding this horse. No, if I was actually present to the moment, I can notice, I'm imagining a self that should be some other way. And that can actually become sacred. If you notice the imagination can be sacred. The ego can be sacred. If you don't start lying to yourself about what's happening.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, how do you then take the moment and then almost in a creative sense, you have to, if you're experiencing the muse, the creative flow, and then all of a sudden a song or a story or something starts flowing, you do have to somehow put boundaries around it, put notes and chord progressions, and you want to capture the sacredness of the moment into a creative piece. How do you do that without honing in down. How do you do that in an expansive way and not a dogmatic way?
Yeah, that's good. I love that question, because to me, there's one thing I like about some other spiritual, philosophical, theological traditions is they put other traditions put more weight on like the masculine and the feminine as being equal expressions of the divine, and I found that in a lot of Christianity, the kind of Christianity that I grew up with anyway, and that I've witnessed, especially the feminine kind of gets negated, or even projected onto the satanic or the evil, or like what we think of as the divine feminine. Sometimes it doesn't have a real place in Christianity, but other traditions do. And I the way I see creativity and creating art, it needs both of those things. And so when I talk about what I would say the divine feminine or the divine masculine, the feminine is sort of that flowy, what you could call chaos, just no thought about it. And this is when you're improvising, when you're just pouring out ideas, brainstorming, noodling around. You need that kind of chaos that you even find in the Genesis account of creation, in this like the chaotic waters, and then some kind of, or God says, and then there's order, and that's the masculine side of it. So there's this kind of like primordial soup of energy that's just like potential, and then there's that's the sort of feminine divine energy, and then there's the order, and let's put this here and put this here, and separate the day from the night, and the water from the land, and let's name the animals. And you're right, you can't actually create anything without both of those things. But it's really hard as an artist, as a creator, as a human playing with those energies, to not just get caught in one or the other. It's hard for most of us, especially, as a kid, everybody's a singer. Everybody's a painter. Everybody's a whatever. Nobody's like, no, that's not me. I don't sing. When you're 5 years old, nobody's like, I'm not a singer. That's not until you see people in junior high or whatever that got the solo in the play and you didn't. And then I guess maybe I'm not as good as them. And you start comparing yourselves how other people are. And eventually you take on identities around that. Like, I am a singer. I am a creative person. I'm an artist. But that critic of like, am I as good as them? Is this as good as that? If that is what you really attach to and take and hold on to in your creative process, you're going to immediately be in writer's block. You're going to immediately you're not going to have anything to say, because as soon as you start trying to say it, that part's going to go, I don't know, is that the best? Is that the best way you could say that? Mm. And you'll just be tongue-tied. On the other hand, if you're afraid of, I've been in a lot of sort of like hippie spiritual circles where the divine feminine is really embraced, and the chaos of this, blah, 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 singing, everybody is like making up stuff the whole time. But there's sometimes been sort of an aversion to that masculine energy of like, okay, but let's do something with this, because that's just chaos. Mm-hmm. And so navigating those two energies is the work of an artist, I think, in a way. It's like, how do you, and I've done that in different ways. Like, for a little while there, like last year, I was actually scheduling some of my day to give time to both of those things. Like I would be like, from 9 to 11 in the morning, I want to just leave room for more of that feminine. I was doing some live streaming, like looping that was just complete chaos and ridiculous, and things that I could, and just writing and just no editing allowed, just giving space to that expression somehow. And then I was taking some time in the afternoon where I was like, and this is like extreme editing part. I'm not in any sort of, just improvising or anything. I'm looking at every note as like, is this the best that it can be? And how do I order this in a way that's like the composer brain or the editor brain or the masculine? And together they dance. Together they can create something fruitful. And sometimes, you can navigate between them in the same moment. And I guess that's perhaps the ideal. I don't know. Because they do need each other. But for me, that was a helpful exercise for a little while to just really give space to each and to notice, are they both flowing freely through me?
Yeah. I've noticed that like Western folks have that either or mindset. Like we need that organization, and other people are like, no, we need that creative flow process. Whereas like an Eastern mind would say, well, that's yin and yang. It's like the same circle, but then, the different energies flow into each other. Yeah,
yin and yang. Or there's also the tantric world, which has, the image of Shakti and Shiva, Shakti being the feminine, Shiva being the masculine, and creation being basically the result of their lovemaking. That these two energies their lovemaking is the dance of all the cosmos, which I think is a lovely image too.
Yeah, that is interesting. Have you ever been like in the creative flow and then become surprised at like a chord progression or a lyric that kind of came out and you're like, whoa, like I didn't know that was in me. I didn't know that I was going to say that or that was there. Like all of a sudden something has come out and kind of defined something with either a lyric or a chord progression. And you're like, where did that come from? Has anything ever like totally surprised you like that?
Oh, for sure. Everything that is good.
Yeah.
The only things that don't surprise me are the little patterns of habits and why do I play that lick all the time? Why do I keep playing? That's more the just like pattern, habitual muscle memory, or when I'm not really paying attention to what's happening and I'm just kind of in automatic mode. That's not surprising. But if I'm actually in the flow, literally every note is surprising.
I like the answer. I wasn't expecting that one. That's a good one. Well, I'm noticing like I'm a pastor in kind of a non-creedal space and more of a covenantal congregational space. So there's a lot of like theological democracy. Like we have 7 statements, but then you get to interpret those through what we would say the Holy Spirit's leading. And so we're allowed to have differing views in the same room, which allows me to still be here.
And allows you to have a community that's not violent, probably.
It's not intellectually violent or spiritually violent, demanding that you conform yourself into, our cognitive standards or whatnot. One thing that I have noticed is a lot of the modern music that we would label as sacred or worship music or whatever. There's a lot of shame language like built into the theology around that. How would you avoid, you as a music creator, kind of who has traveled through that space and winded up in a different space? How would you avoid those old theological or artistic habits when you write your current songs? Like, is there a practice that helps you stay tuned into the new ways of creating? And do you ever feel the pull to go backwards of like into those old ways of thinking and believing and writing?
I love that question. I just led some Good Friday and Easter services for my cousin. Actually, he has a church up in Wisconsin. He asked me to come play his Holy Week services, and I was like, yeah, sure. And then after I said yes, I was like, it's been a while since I've done Holy Week services, and I was like, wait, are there like songs about the cross that I want to sing that aren't about like God so hated the world that he'd murder his only son? That was his joke, by the way. I laughed
That,
at that when he said that. That's really
I've not
good.
heard that, but I'm adopting it.
Yeah, it's good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I basically was like, I'm not a real fan of like penal substitutionary atonement and stuff. I can sing a lot of stuff at this point that okay, so this is what, back to your question of like, how can we sing around shame? To me, there's like a way of singing about anything that, if it's honest and first person, like I'm feeling shame, I don't have a problem with somebody that's feeling shame singing about how they're feeling shame. But when that moves to like we should all be feeling shame, or that somehow existentially we are shameful, or that God, if we don't do something, we should be feeling like, and that's a subtle sometimes line of like, where is this just a shameful part of us expressing shame? And also as a worship leader, as a liturgist of something that I've done my whole life of putting words in people's mouths when they're in a collective communal space. What do I want them to sing? Do I want them to sing I'm feeling shame? I don't. Actually, right now, that's part of the art of it. It's like, I don't know, because if we totally ignore the darkness that a lot of us do feel and never acknowledge it, are we just kind of candy coating life and spirituality into this just positive mumbo jumbo that's not actually true to our lived experience? But at the same time, how do we not increase the shame in people's lives by putting shame in their mouths? Mm-hmm. So that's I think that's a subjective decision, an artistic decision, and a pastoral decision for a specific group of people in a specific moment. What do we want to have in our mouths? Word-wise, and what concepts do we want to be swimming in? What images do we want to be swimming in our liturgy? So I will say a lot of popular Christian music that talks about the cross specifically, I find more harmful than good personally. And my aesthetics are like, I wouldn't sing that. It sounds to me like you're actually like exalting shame in a weird way by making it seem like we should feel ashamed, as opposed to confessing, wow, I'm lost in my own shame, which that could just be an honest confession. Noticing like, that's my own psychosis. I'm lost in my own shame. That's my own neuroses, and I'm lost in my own shame. For me, there's been an interesting bridge. Interesting is not a good word for it. A profound and exciting bridge, actually, between some of the dualistic language and even some of the more negative language, like shame or things, and my perspective that all is already sacred and all is already holy and already is divine. And that bridge between the more dualistic framework of a lot of Christianity and this more non-dual experience of reality has been IFS, which is internal family systems. It's a way of, it's a sort of therapeutic approach where therapists don't just talk to the client or the patient as though they're a singular person that is only feeling one way or only thinking one way, because that's not how it is. If I say like, how are you doing today? We all usually answer with a blanket, yeah, I'm pretty good, or I'm a little, I don't know, it's a little rough. But if we really got into like, how are you actually feeling? You could find probably all sorts of things. Well, I'm feeling hungry, feeling a little tired, I'm feeling a little excited, a little nervous, a little horny, I'm a little grumpy, like all sorts of stuff probably. And all of these things we talk about it even in just normal language. It's like, well, part of me feels angry right now, but part of me is okay with this. And that's like true to our experience more than just, no, I am angry, or no, I am okay. And so this approach deals with parts. And in this approach, we can go, yeah, a part of me does feel ashamed, and a part of me does feel separate from God. And the truth is that from the non-dual perspective, saying everything is sacred or everything is divine, that's not really a true thing to speak from a part that feels alienated from God. To go like, just say that I'm God is like, just becomes a really either narcissistic ego expansion of that part, or a spiritual bypass, or it's just not actually true for that part. If I'm identified only as this part, it's not the whole. It feels, that part feels alienated. It feels, so if it feels like a me, it's not God in that way. It's the separate me. It's the sin. It's the shame. And so, but having a framework, we can go, what I love about IFS is what they're inviting in the process is for those parts to find what they call self, capital S, self. And self, or rather vice versa, self finds these parts. And self can work with these parts. And there are a lot of times like younger parts. Like, wow, that part was developed when I was 8 years old. And it's a response to being in this sort of environment. And every time I get around this church environment, the 8-year-old shuts his mouth and is like, we're unsafe in here. And I start feeling really afraid. And so you go, okay, do you want to bring me into that 8-year-old self? You start talking to and like dealing with that 8-year-old self from self, which is this open, spacious, non-judging, loving presence. You could say God, the presence of God, the presence of Spirit, the presence. And so that bridge to me is really interesting because it creates a lot of opportunity to use more dualistic language, to use more even dualistic frameworks, but not to completely separate it existentially from God, from self, from the greater love and sacredness that I believe that part is already a part of. Because then we can notice, a part of me feels shame. And we can tend to that part from love. And that's a different approach than, we should be ashamed and God saves us from shame. Now we're just identified completely with the part and forgetting that we have access to being that love of the divine for that part. So I think theologically, we need the non-dual. We need more pastors in the church and in Christianity to understand that the non-dual is actually how things are in the depths of it. But then bridge that to where people tend to be at, which is completely identified with this part in this moment or that part. Yeah. And these parts war against each other. And then we can use the bridge of religion, songs, liturgy, therapy, whatever, to bring these parts of us back into integration with the whole.
I like that picture of integration. Like, it's almost like we spiritualize and create like a shame that is projected onto us from our theology.
Yeah.
And then instead of dealing with that, we almost alienate the part of ourselves that feels that. And then we call that forgiveness or conversion or whatever. Yes. And we stuff it away. But then, like, if you look at the denominations that are really like, they do that, like conversionism and forgiveness and shame and sin, and now you're clean, now you're good. It's almost like a repression of that self, and then that comes out in very unhealthy ways in the religious communities that we're now starting to recognize with all these, patterns of abuse that are coming out and addiction and whatnot. But we have to, like, the goal of that form of Christianity is to keep that part of yourself alienated as much as possible, because that's the bad, that's the evil. And instead of like alienation, there's got to be like this you have to transcend that old self, but you have to include it in the new part, in the new you that's coming out. Like transcend and include, as Richard Rohr talks about. So how do you like transcend those parts of you that are like, wow, I really dropped the ball on this one, like actual, like I messed up, sin, shame experiences, but transcend, but somehow not alienate that part of you, but include it in who you're becoming in a healthy way.
Well, that's what the work of IFS is in a way, but it's not so much that because it's interesting, the you is this shifting ego thing. Because like, where are you in the experience of being lost in a part, of being completely identified with a part? So we all know the difference between, if you can notice, wow, I'm feeling a little angry, I'm feeling anger, that's a different place to be than completely in red rage where you don't see anything but the anger.
Yeah.
Right? There's no, like, when you're completely in anger and identified with it, there's no like, oh, I'm feeling anger right now. You've totally lost in it. You've totally forgotten that there's anything but the anger happening. And in that space, it's all about them. You did this. This is you. It's all about the external world. You don't even realize there's a subjective experience happening really in that moment when you're totally lost in it. So the work of IFS usually involves getting in touch with self. So there's like little questions that they'll ask that are good shortcuts to that, or tools, technologies to help us get to self, which is like, and how are you feeling towards this part of you that's angry? And if you're just feeling like you're that part, what do you mean, how am I feeling towards that part? I am angry. Okay. But this is whatever work you can do to, like, can you notice that you're also, and you can do different things with meditation, with mindfulness, like, okay, notice the anger. Where is that in your body? It's here in my stomach. Okay. Do you notice that you also have a heart? Can you feel that too? Does that feel angry? Right? Oh no, that's not as angry. Okay. So there's a part of you that's angry. There's a part of you that's not. How do you feel towards that part of you that's angry? Well, you can do it to like back up a little bit from the part that you're identified with.
Yeah.
And a lot of times at first it'll be another part that comes in. So they'll be like, I feel disgusted that I'm angry. I don't want to be disgusted. It's like, okay, that's another part. So we have a disgusted part. We've got an angry part. We can know that we get to self when we get to that. Oh, I feel compassion for, or I feel care for that part, or I feel curious about that part. There's the open, non-judging, loving curiosity. That is self. That is the spirit of God. That is love. That's who we are already when we stop forgetting who we are. So it's like, I love the picture. I love the image of like the clouds in the sky. Of like, the sky doesn't actually have to transcend the clouds. The clouds are in it already. If I just think I'm in a cloud, if I just think I'm a cloud, all I see is the storm. All I see is the gray, and I'm just lost in this haze. But if I can somehow remember, I think that's what, remember that I'm not just this cloud. I'm also the sky. I'm also all these other clouds. The sky has room for all these clouds. It's not threatened by any of these clouds. And so when we find a way to like remember that, and then we care, the sky already is going to be loving to that cloud. It's not that I, the cloud, have to become a better cloud. If I'm this shameful cloud, yeah, you're right. It's another part that would want to repress that or push that down and be like, stop that. We're redeemed, and then it just gets shoved down. But to actually move into the spirit, to move into the self, it creates this room where it notices that part. It can care for that part from outside it, from within it, from everywhere, because the sky is infinite. And so it's not threat. It can go into the stories with the cloud. And so all that's a long way of saying, like, I don't think transcendence is a me that's going, okay, I got to be a transcendent me. That's going, okay, who do I think I am right now? Oh, I think I'm this. Can I back up a little bit to see some space around that and have compassion and care and curiosity about who I think I am and what this part of me that's being identified with as the complete me? Because the complete me can never be thought of, because that's a thought that's in me, right? Like, so if I have a clear definition of what I am, well, I'm this guy and I behave this way and I'm a righteous guy. I'm a good guy. I'm a kind guy. So why am I being mean right now? Like, okay, I'm identified with some part of me that feels like he's a kind guy. That's some sort of story I have about myself that I'm only kind, which is not true. Sometimes I'm an asshole, and that's a part of me, and this is a part of me. And so it's a matter of remembering. It's a matter of, which is why I love the Eucharist again. It's like this remember me, remember the bigger thing that's happening here in this moment.
Yeah. I like collaboration. Like I grew up fundamentalist Pentecostal, and then I embraced that in my teens, early 20s. I was very fundamentalist, and then just started to slowly work my way out of that. Done a lot of progress since then, but part of me looks back on the old me that was embracing fundamentalism and all this. And I just shake my head. I'm like, oh gosh, you're such an idiot. Why all those feelings. And then when I encounter the old me in my current world in another person, a fundamentalist pastor and whatnot, it drags up all of those emotions that I feel towards the old me. And then I aim it outward, project it onto that one. I do a lot of funerals for our town, 30 to 40 a year kind of a thing.
Wow.
And I did a funeral for a 22-year-old who passed away of cancer, and he happened to not be religious. And the family asked specifically for a non-religious service, so I was happy to do that. I provided a space for grief and celebration of life and all this stuff. There's a fundamentalist pastor that was there, and I got a call, the next Monday, where he was like, "You're just handing them secular humanism. There's no eternal hope. It's just going on and on and on." And I found, I did that observer mode instead of unleashing on this guy. I just said, we have different theology, and then I just ended the conversation, and then I converted all of that. I collaborated with myself, the old self, and then this pastor. I created this space. I did a collaborative, and then I was like, what was happening in that conversation? And oh, this was high control religious language. And then I did an entire podcast episode about high control religious language where I told the story and then just walked through here's what happened in the conversation. He said this, that's this. This is, and it did this whole collaboration mode. It ended up being one of my top 10 most downloaded episodes. But it was this collaboration with a part of me that I like to keep alienated. And then something really awesome came out of that. Have you ever collaborated with older versions of yourself, in the present, and then found something beautiful come out of that?
Yeah, I think, so to go back to IFS again, I think that all the parts, the assumption of the therapist in these scenarios is you assume that the parts have a purpose that's constructive. There's a reason that whatever mechanism that pastor came up for, no, we can't just be in the secular giving funerals. There's something, we got to have the truth here. That driving for the truth, even at the cost of human compassion or decency or whatever, probably served him at some point for some reason, that impetus, that strategy. And I love how you brought projection into it, because if I'm bothered by that, it's probably because I have a part of me that does something like that too, and I have other parts that are I don't like when that part does that, because that messes us up, that ruins our relationships, that makes us feel ashamed, that makes that young part of me that's afraid of hell start feeling afraid again. And he's down there going, "Oh no, my bad," And so we have protectors that are get out of here. Stop giving us that religious BS. Be a decent human being. The other parts to that judgment part, Michael, come on, you're going to get us in trouble. You're going to, so there's all these, and then that part comes forward. And it's oh no, I shouldn't have said that. So again, to remember that all these are parts. And when we're remembering them, it's not to kill them. It's not to destroy them or to get rid of them. Some of these strategies of hey, now's a good time to be quiet. Or some of these strategies of that, let's be playful, being the playful 8-year-old that wants to just skip around. All these parts, when they're freed from their burdens, their false beliefs, can be beautiful enhancers of life and ways of, this part likes to be very organized, and maybe it came from fear originally, but now we've found a way to it doesn't have to come from just fear. This part gets to be really organized, and that helps us have a career in my job, I'm really organized, And so, integrating these parts into a more fruitful and holistic community, a family, a body that's not, that's how reality works. There's diversity within everything. Every individual is full of diversity. And so allowing the diversity within us to fully thrive, it's not, again, we're not, if we're just trying to pound out, get that out of here, repress this, project that, that's only other parts. That's never, the self is never trying to do that. So the self would always integrate and bring the most beautiful aspects of the part to the present and allow it to dance and thrive however it wants.
I like that. I got one more question for you.
Yeah.
If your art, your music could inspire one lasting question in the people that encounter it, rather than provide some kind of an answer, what would you want that question to be?
Who am I?
Oh, say more.
I think it all comes down to that. Who am I? Who am I in this moment thinking that I am? Because all the destructive behaviors, all of what we call sin, all of what we call violence, when you trace it down, I've never seen anybody that's just consistently poking their own eyeballs.
Yeah.
Or like pulling off their own skin, or if you feel like this is me, you don't harm it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's only when it feels like an other than me. So this is what I love about Jesus' teachings about enemies. It's like, you can't, if you have an enemy still, you're not with Christ. You're not in Christ. You are the resistance to Christ, which is to live in hell. To be the resistance to love is to live in absolute hell. And we all know what hell feels like. But heaven, on the other hand, is the recognition of my brother and my enemy, is the recognition of my shared body of Christ with whoever I'm with, whether they think differently, whether they look differently, whether they want to think of me as the enemy. That to love my enemy is to love Christ, because that's where I thought Christ couldn't be. And Christ always was like, I will be where you think I'm not. You'll find me in prison, you'll find me on the side of the street, in the most outrageous places. That's wherever you think I'm not. That's probably where you should start looking, because that's a matter of identity. You think you're not this, you think you're only here. You think you're only, and this is in any moment, again, down to my emotions right now. Am I only identified with the happy, generous emotions? Have I completely disidentified and disavowed my grief, my anger, my own judgments, my own thoughts, my own whatever? It's all a matter of identity. We like to make it about morality. We like to make it about beliefs, about the external. What do you think about God? Do you think that Jesus is the only way to heaven? Are you in? Who do you vote for? What side are you on? What country do you belong to? All these things are just like clothes of the individual bodies and minds, and it's not that they're unimportant. It's just, if you're identified, and that even the concept of identification, if you're completely lost and apart, doesn't make any sense. But until you see, sometimes I identify only as this, when you can start seeing that in any way. You go, okay, so what am I identified as right now? And as soon as I start even just asking the question, I immediately start becoming more free. Immediately start becoming more spacious, because you're going, who am I? Am I just this body? And if you actually sincerely look at that with curiosity, no, you're not. You'll see. You can see it directly because you're witnessing it. Am I just this mind? No, because I can witness the mind. There's just this awareness that transcends any form, anything that I think I could be. And the more spacious that's moving into the sky, being the sky that you already are. From that place, nobody's poking. You're not going to cause any harm. How can you cause harm? You're not poking your own eyeballs. It doesn't make any sense. If you notice, my enemy in a fundamental way is me. It's my projection. It's not, and that's not the same as saying that body is this body. That's not it. It's the life that is, this is a metaphor, a way of saying it, but the life that is animating this body is the same life that's animating that body. And if I am identified more with the life that's animating this body than the specifics of this body, I'm not going to harm the life that's animating that body. That's me. That's the same life. And so all the questions of morality and, because, I want the world, when you ask, like, what could you have people ask? What one question? Of course, like, there are questions that could deconstruct some of their really harmful beliefs. Well, why are we bombing Palestine? Why are we alienating, these, why are we, what's your bigotry based on? But that to me is all like kind of a little farther up in the tree than the roots. The roots is who am I? And as soon as I decide I am this, I'm a Christian man who needs to stand up for the word of God at any cost, that's going to grow into a tree that when I encounter something that threatens that story, I'm going to be violent towards it.
Wow.
So until I get lower in the roots and go, who do I think I am? I can't actually ever be nonviolent. I can't actually ever be loving until I look at who I think I am.
That blew my mind. Like, I'm going to be thinking about, I've never thought of it that way, but I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time. I'm glad I recorded this. I can go back and listen to it. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on the show and just talking like psychology and consciousness and religion and spirituality and music and art. It was so much fun. I had a blast. It was awesome.
Thank you, Tom. It was fun talking to you. Good questions. I appreciated your questions.
Cool. Where do you want to send folks to connect with your work?
I'm coming out with a new album soon, and I'll be doing, so that's on Gungor Music. Find me on the socials. And then I think I'm going to be doing another podcast season of The Liturgist as well. So
nice.
My talking. You can hear me talk on there as well.
Oh, cool. I'll make sure, same feed that it has been on?
Yep.
All right. Well, I'll put some links in the show notes so people can just click on it and find you. That's great.
Great. Thank you.
Well, again, thanks again for coming on and like causing little explosions in my brain. This is, you got me thinking, and as a good thing. So I love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.